folks, I'm hanging out with Benjamin Dixon. Sorry, it wasn't Dixon, was it?
Yeah, no, it's Dixon.
Oh, it is Dixon. Sorry, I'm terrible with names.
No problem.
And we're going to be talking about the ideology of Black Lives Matter. So, Benjamin, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell people what you do.
I am Benjamin Dixon. I host the Benjamin Dixon Show here on internet radio, on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. Just another guy with a podcast and a blog.
Okay. And I take it you're a supporter of Black Lives Matter.
In general, yeah. I mean, I have some places where I disagree with them, but in the general movement, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think it's important to stress that Black Lives Matter isn't just like a single movement, is it?
Right.
It's really like an amalgamation of many different movements.
Yeah, so you have the actual organization, Black Lives Matter, Movement for Black Lives, and you have branch organizations, Campaign Zero, a lot of actual organizations, but then you have the general rallying cry, if you would, that everyone gathers around.
Yeah. And so what do you want to tell people like the organizations and groups in Black Lives Matter that you support?
Well, definitely Campaign Zero, right? Campaign Zero has a very specific set of things that they want to accomplish. They want to achieve on police reform, criminal justice reform, community policing, ending of broken glass policing, some very concrete things that they've researched. They've gathered the data and presented a case, and definitely support that.
Right, okay. And now, I don't think there are many people who are actually in opposition to those things, but it seems that every time something happens with Black Lives Matter, nobody ever wants to talk about the problem elements of Black Lives Matter. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Well, I guess the part of that statement, it would be the problem elements of Black Lives Matter. There's always going to be problem elements to any group. Any actual organization, any movement, yeah. There's always going to be problematic elements, no matter what.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, you have to admit that the riots that have gone on under the rubric of Black Lives Matter protests have been a bit shocking, haven't they?
Well, I mean, no, I don't really agree with that, because most of the time, in many instances, you see a complete separation of groups. For instance, in Baltimore, you saw the actual protesters who gathered very peacefully for hours. And then later on, there was an actual riot where property was burned, buildings were destroyed, cars were demolished. But there's a clear separation. You rarely see the people who riot. You rarely see them attending the peaceful protests. And the people who are protesting peacefully, you rarely see them in any of those riots unless they're just covering it. Let's take a DeRay McKesson, for example. He would be there covering it. But in terms of the actual people looting and rioting, there's always been a clear separation between those two groups.
Right, okay. So, I mean, for example, in Milwaukee, when you had them going around and deliberately assaulting people who are white, that's not something that you think Black Lives Matter would advocate for.
Oh, I mean, clearly not, right? So Black Lives Matter has stated on, almost painstakingly done so over and over again, almost to the point where I'm like, it's time for them to stop capitulating and giving these disclaimers of, we're not responsible for these people. We disavow this type of violence. We're a nonviolent movement. And after a while, it becomes just kind of a cat and mouse game where they're going to be forced to say that no matter what, even if the person is not remotely connected to their movement. So I'm almost at the point where it's time for them to stop capitulating, because no matter what, someone is going to try to lay something at the feet of Black Lives Matter that has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter.
Right. Don't you think that Black Lives Matter began the dichotomy of black versus white in the public discourse, though?
I mean,
no. Seriously,
go ahead.
It's not really publicly acceptable to racialize almost every issue, but that's what Black Lives Matter does, isn't it?
I mean, America is highly racialized, and it has been highly racialized for all of the hundreds of years of its existence. So no, I mean, Black Lives Matter didn't bring this to the front. Black Lives Matter has a very specific goal, and it seems as soon as Black Lives Matter coalesced into a movement, more or less, then it began to be targeted by people who want them to be held accountable for every loose thing that a black person may have done, or they want them to be responsible for the discourse. It's almost like when President Obama was elected and everyone said America is so much more divided now because of President Obama. And I'm like, no, not Not really. America has always been divided, and the people who are creating the division even more are looking at the person that says, we want to bring everyone together. We want to have a bipartisan consensus and laying it at the feet of him. Right. So why would we lay the responsibility of the racial animus in America at the feet of Black Lives Matter when the racial animus existed long before?
It's not just Black Lives Matter, but I do honestly think that they're being encouraged by the left in America, and not just in America. I mean, everywhere.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it seems to be a recurring feature. I mean, I'm not an American, but I watch a lot of American media. I keep up with American news, and I've got no particular affiliation with any American party. My personal preference probably would have been Bernie Sanders. And when Bernie Sanders got knocked out, actually, it was before that. It was when he said that white people didn't know what it was like to be poor that really turned me off of Bernie Sanders, because it's an absurd statement on the face of it.
Yeah.
And that's my point. That's exactly my point.
It was an extremely clumsy statement, to say the least.
It's just an outright false statement. And it's the sort of statement that instantly turns off anyone who is looking to not racialize non-racial issues. Poverty isn't an issue that matters about race. There are poor people of every race.
Absolutely.
So to suggest that only Black people know what it's like to be poor, that really got my goat.
Well, I mean, it didn't get to be sure, it didn't just get your goat, right? It actually bothered a lot of African Americans, because we're like, well, one, not all African Americans are poor, and two, we know good and damn well that there's plenty of white people living in the, he actually used the word ghettos. So, it was a clumsy statement, but I guess I'm trying to see how that reflects on the broader narrative we have going here.
Well, that's my point. It's the fact that, I mean, the thing that annoyed me about it is he was under pressure in a debate, and that's where he went. That was the sort of knee-jerk reaction. What he was, I know white people don't know what it's like to be poor, and it was like, I mean, that speaks to a larger context of the issue, as in, there are so many problems that aren't racial. I mean, I see police violence in America, and to me, as a British person, this looks like a class conflict. I mean, it's not people who are well-spoken being beaten by cops. It's always the lowest people in society, the ill-educated, the people who have got no prospects. They're not going to get jobs on MTV preaching this kind of this racial nonsense, and they're not going to end up working with YouTube like Train Melvin or anything like that. These are the people on the bottom of the rung, and you get Black police victimizing them as well.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there's clearly a case that Black Lives Matter actually makes that doesn't absolve a police officer based on his race, right? We saw the case out of Louisiana, the 6-year-old white boy who was shot by 2 Black police officers, and you had a lot of Black Lives Matter activists and leadership actually speak out on behalf of Jared, the 6-year-old boy who was killed. So, we by Black police officers. So it's not just a white police officer issue. It's a blue police officer issue, right? So
no, I agree. I'm totally on board with you there. And that's in fact one of my main contentions about Black Lives Matter. To call it Black Lives Matter makes it a racial issue, when in fact it's not. It's a class issue.
Well, when actually, I mean, that's partially true, right? So that's like part of the story. Yes, it is. I make the argument many times on my channel that the disparate treatment that you get at the hands of police is a class issue, right? There is a class intersection involved, but there's still the reality that if you're Black, you're 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police, even if you're unarmed, than if you're white. So yes, there's a class issue, but then there's also a very strong racial dynamic underneath. And even if you look at it just purely on the terms of class, let me just finish this thought real quick.
Let's stop on the racial dynamic a second, because I'm very interested in that. Because I looked at the Washington Post, was it, who did the 2015 police statistics of who they killed. Yeah. And I mean, Black people were disproportionately killed, right? But it didn't appear to be about racism. I mean, it seems to stem out of the various social and family problems coming out of Black communities in the United States. That seems to be the reason that this is happening. in terms of
the reason people were killed, you're saying it stems from the social, political, economic issues.
These people have the sort of mindset where they think it's a good idea to fight the police.
These people have this mindset to have the police. So, actually, that's a pretty broad statement that you're trying to apply to. You're trying to generalize it, right? I mean, there's so many instances.
I am generalizing. Yeah,
there's so many
instances. I realize it's not going to be accurate in every single case,
right?
But for example, I went through the list of the Washington Post examples, and they actually, if you scroll down and it was a long list, they would actually give you a brief description of what has happened in each case. And I mean, 90% of the shootings by the police were of armed suspects,
right,
who were obviously actively resisting. So I think it's fair for us to say that's probably a legitimate use of police force, right?
Yeah, all right. So I mean, there are more instances of police officers with justified shootings, according to the Washington Post report, right? But there are instances. There are plenty of.
Directly after that, if you actually go down and look at the unarmed ones, if you just go through, I should have made a tally actually. But I just kept seeing black suspect attack the police or tried to take his gun or tried to do something. So even though the man was unarmed, he was still actively trying to assault the police. And do you think in those circumstances the police are justified in defending themselves?
I mean, I can't speak to a general statement, right? So case by case, I think anyone rational and reasonable will go case by case and say, okay, these are the facts of this case, right? Yeah. But so often, I mean, would you concede to the fact that there have been plenty of examples where police officers have shot someone who was not a threat to them? Like, I mean, and that's specifically what Black Lives Matter is speaking to. Not just the actual shooting, right? So Black Lives Matter is actually going for far more. They're going for accountability and transparency. They're asking the police agencies to actually report on there's some police agencies across the United States that don't even report the race or the incident, right? So there's instances where we don't even know the facts of the case because they're not required to report in their particular city. And Black Lives Matter is saying we need to get some unified reporting across the country. We need to get some unified standards. And I think that's pretty reasonable.
Absolutely. I mean, totally in support of holding the police accountable. I think any power needs to be held accountable. But like, for example, you said, you don't want to speak to generalized statements, and then you said that black people were 2.5 times more likely to be killed by the police.
That's not a general statement. That's actually based on the Washington Post data, the same data that you're pulling.
But that's my point. That's exactly my point, though. If you actually drill down and look at the actual individual cases, I didn't see any that didn't seem justified. I mean, I know there are. Like, what was the young black kid who had a toy gun and the cop car just pulls up, jumps out, and shoots the kid?
Tamir Rice.
It was not Tamir Rice, was it?
Sorry, yep. John Crawford shopping in Walmart, gunned down. A friend of mine, Corey Jones in South Florida, coming back from work at 3 o'clock in the morning, gunned down by an unmarked vehicle officer who was plain clothes, gunned down, right? This is a guy that I worked with for 2 years, almost every day. And then we remained friends for 10 years after that. Like, I mean, a pillar in his community, gunned down. Now that officer has been arrested, but he still hasn't gone to trial. And we've seen, even when they get to trial, it's a slim chance of actually even getting to trial in the first place. So these are the things that we're actually speaking about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. They are definitely legitimate issues. But when you say something like, well, black people are more likely to be killed by the police, therefore the police are racist, or the implication is that the police are racist, I don't actually think that's fair.
Well, I mean, there's a big jump, right? So there's a big jump between being killed by the police and the police are racist and not recognizing the systemic forces that actually leads a police officer to run in on a scene with a 12-year-old Tamir Rice and assume that he was 19 and shoot and assume that he was a threat without even ascertaining the situation, right? There's there are preconceived notions and biases that people are, these implicit biases that they may not even be aware of. And that's something that has to be spoken to as well, right? So you may not consider yourself a racist, you may not be a technical racist, but if your first assumption is you feel threatened or you feel like your life's in danger because the person is black, then that, whether you call it racist or not, that's extremely dangerous and detrimental to the African American community, and we have to address that.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? You said because the person was black, and we don't know it was because the person was black. As far as we know,
I mean, we've seen plenty, but there are plenty of examples of white men with guns, open carry, just walking down the streets without a police officer driving up and doing anything other than asking how your day was, sir, or getting more information. We got a call about someone walking around with a gun. Could you tell us why you're out here today? There's this benefit of the doubt that's given to a certain demographic in America that's not afforded. Like black people, we know you do not open carry even in an open carry state. Now, why should we have that hindrance put on our back? Take Dallas, right? The horrible shooting in Dallas. There was a man blasted across the United States because he was exercising his right to carry an open carry weapon. And yet, you know, it's like this is the wrong day of any day to actually be a black person open carrying. Why should we have to have a double standard on open carry in open carry states when if we do so, it's very likely that we're going to, at a minimum, be harassed at a level that other people are not?
No, I agree. You absolutely shouldn't. And it does speak to a giant failure of not just the police force in general, but the training that the police undergo.
Absolutely.
Because as I'm aware that most police forces have, I think it's something like 2 years of training, whereas American police only get 6 months of training.
Right.
And I think that's a really significant problem. And especially, and not only that, I've actually seen videos of the police training, and it almost seems like they're trying to make them afraid of the public and make them react as fast as possible to preserve their own lives.
So this
which
is
an
what
understandable thing to want to do, but I mean, I think that it does definitely have the detrimental effect of criminalizing segments of society.
And this is what kind of blows me away, right? About you and your audience and similar people who can see that American policing is a problem, right? If we just compared American policing to the UK policing, there is a problem of magnitudes of order greater than what happens in the UK. But we could see it in general in America. But when we drill down to the specifics of the black community, it's like all of a sudden, oh no, that was justified. No, that wasn't a problem. Well, if you could diagnose the problem in general across America, there's a hyper-militarized police agency that are over-aggressive, undertrained, underfunded, quite, in terms of salaries. They spend plenty of money on weapons. If we could see that, then why do we become blind to it when it's in regards to the black community?
I think the problem is that there's a specific kind of culture in certain black communities, isn't there, in America, that's very adversarial towards authority in general.
I don't know. Tell me about that. Tell me about that culture.
I mean, do you not think that I don't know how you describe it, maybe gangster culture, something like that? The sort of thing I'm talking about, right?
No, not really.
No.
I mean, I do know young people are far more likely. I do know young people are far more likely to be adversarial with adults and authority. So if you're young and you're black, or even any color for that matter, then you're more likely to have a violent confrontation with a police officer.
Yeah, but I think that the segments I'm talking about are not the segments who are actually real Black Lives Matter supporters. I mean, talking specifically about the rioters, those sorts of people who go and burn down buildings, go and flip over police cars, go and beat people on the basis of their race. I don't really think they are actually Black Lives Matter supporters. I think they're just people who live in a certain type of culture that really hates the police.
So that's why it's so problematic, though, in your video where you talk about Black Lives Matter. You lay at the feet of the organization and the ideology these people who are no more supportive of Black Lives Matter than anyone else. Like, they won't even come out to these people that you're talking about. They're not going to come out and march to an actual protest. There's insurrectionists.
They come out as soon as there is a protest, though, don't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but there's insurrectionists that show up at every single protest. I've been at an Occupy Wall Street protest. I've been at a Occupy the DNC protest. And at every protest I've ever been at, there is an element of insurrectionists, anarchists who want to cause a confrontation. I've actually documented it at the DNC, where over 99% of the people out there were peacefully protesting. But there was about 5 people who could have triggered a mass riot because they wanted to fight the police. And so we can't lay that at the feet of the 99% that are out there. There's always going to be insurrectionists in every crowd.
Okay, well then that begs the question: whose job is it to keep the problem elements out of your movement?
The police. I mean, well, there's a thing that you slipped in there at the very end of the statement. They're not a part of anyone's movement. They have no more respect for Black Lives Matter. Would you agree with this, that people of this particular culture that you're describing, that, I mean, I would love for you to describe more, would you at least agree that they have no more respect?
Describe it in a way that you would consider racist.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not sensitive like that. Sure, give it your best shot. Would you believe? I would
call it thug culture. The sort of gangster rapper sort of culture.
Yeah, but I've seen plenty of white kids who the highest consumers of rap and gangster culture are white kids,
I don't mean middle class kids who are rebelling against their parents by listening to Ice-T.
Well, they're not listening to Ice-T anymore, but I got you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But you do know what I mean with the sort of, the Milwaukee riot was just the most classic example, because you would see all of these guys, they don't have shirts on, they're covered in tattoos, they've got loads of bling, their trousers around their asses and all this sort of thing. And it's obvious that this comes from a certain kind of insular culture.
It comes from, that's the culture is what I'm kind of trying to get at, right?
I wouldn't say you were part of that culture.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I wouldn't say that you were part of that culture.
I guess you wouldn't know that I actually grew up around that culture that you're trying to describe. It exists, right? So there is. Let's not pretend, right? So yes, there is a. I personally call it a subculture, right? There's a subculture in every culture. There's a subculture, and there's a subculture that has an intersection of poverty, and where you find poverty, you're going to find violence. There's almost there's a direct correlation between the economic plight and the amount of violence and crime in your community. So yes, it exists, but they are not what you put at the end of your last statement was that they are a part of the movement. And I wanted to say that, I think it's reasonable. Let me finish this one thought real quick. That these people that you're describing, they have no more respect for the Black Lives Matter movement than they do for the police, right? So just because they're running around saying, F Trump, F white people, it doesn't automatically affiliate them with anything that's actually trying to happen in a positive Black Lives Matter movement. So we're no more responsible for them than Gamergate would be responsible for someone who's sending rape threats, right?
I totally agree. And this is something that I have been trying to point out to people. It's like, look, it's very difficult to hold people accountable for things that they're not responsible for. Mm-hmm. This is why I asked you who should be responsible for keeping these people away from your protests, because one of the things we did in Gamergate was literally just hound them until they left, until they stopped. We would go on mass reporting campaigns if we saw anything untoward being sent towards any suckies, whoever. And it was the best we could do, and yet the media still condemned us roundly.
Absolutely. And it's the perfect example of taking fringe examples and trying to apply it to a broader movement when it simply doesn't apply. I've been at the protests where you've had Black Lives Matter activists who are trying to stop the insurrectionists, right? So this happens on a case-by-case basis at every protest. But let me ask you, out of all the protests, because you've done a lot of research on Black Lives Matter, how many of the protests have you found that devolved into some type of riot or violence?
Honestly, the only ones that really get coverage are the ones that devolve into riot violence.
Yeah, so, that's fair. That's fair. In the last 900 days, a year and a half, there have been over 1,800 Black Lives Matter protests. And how many of them have we even heard about, right? Most of us don't even know that many exist. And then how many of them actually turning violent? If we had 1,800 protests turning violent every single time, I'm sure the National Guard would be out at this point. So it's like people try to take a microcosm and try to apply it as a broader trend when there's no form or fashion, any type of trend.
Yeah, and then that's totally fair. We don't get to hear about those Black Lives Matter protests that aren't doing something wrong, basically, that are actually standing up for a legitimate issue. And it's probably something to do with the 24-hour news cycle.
Absolutely.
Where they just want the headline-grabbing stories.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But I have to say, I have seen very dubious rhetoric coming from people who are Black Lives Matter affiliated staunchly. And the founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto tweeted out, "Please, Allah, give me the power not to cuss or kill these white people and men out here today."
Right.
Something like
that.
Right. I can't imagine a white person saying something like that about black people and then not being driven out of wherever they were.
But they are. They do on a regular. Have you read your comment section, like on the Black Lives Matter video? I just perused the comment section, and every violent type of racist jargon possible was there. But But that doesn't negate what you're saying, right? You're saying Toronto.
I don't see it, I'm afraid.
Oh, I have screenshots. I'll send them to you.
No. Send me them. You know, I read my comments all the time, and I don't.
Yeah, and it was
if I do see anything that's overtly hateful, then I just remove it.
Oh no, it's there. I'll send it to you. I might can pull it up on the screen here, but I'll send it. But your bigger point to the founder of Black Lives Matter in Toronto. So you know, if you and I decided to get together and start an international chapter of Black Lives Matter, we just make an agreement and boom, it's done. So there's no like central organization that's overriding any of these individual organizations, right? It's very decentralized. That doesn't excuse what she said. However, I mean, there's almost in every culture, there's this colloquial of "Lord, give me strength." Right? It's just a standard thing that people say. For her, Lord is Allah. Allah, give me strength. But it became so much more nefarious because she said Allah instead of Lord. And another thing, I looked her up, right? So she has like 1,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, she's not really representative of many people there. That doesn't excuse what she says, but it also doesn't make her the spokesperson for Black Lives Matter.
No, it doesn't. It's just, this is my problem though, isn't it? It's like there's never... It seems like a sort of no true Black Lives Matter supporter.
No true Scotsman. All right.
No matter what's said, the bubble kind of shrinks until we've you know, okay, none of these people are now representative. Yeah. And at what point do we stop? You know. Yeah,
well, I mean, the same question could be begged, right, of any other movement, right? And the best example is, of course, Gamergate, right? We all reject. Every organization rejects the fringe elements of their organization. And I think it's safe to say that every organization, even just the organization of white America, right? It's not an actual organization, but white America itself, though it's not organized, has very extreme elements that should be rejected, but we're kind of moving into an era where it's less rejected. So it's just kind of the burden of having a platform. Coattails. People will always ride your coattails with their individual agenda, no matter how detrimental it is. I mean, even at the top of your page on Twitter, you've pinned something that I think is brilliant, letting people know never to make a threat, right? Because it does a disservice. And that's something that you have to communicate. And that's something that Black Lives Matter on a regular basis has to communicate. So we're all plagued by it. But the question is, who actually is defining us by that? And it seems as though, to me, right, it seems as though that you want to define Black Lives Matter by these edge fringe examples, but you reject the idea of someone defining Gamergate or even yourself as an individual by the edge examples of your followers. And we have to be able to do it.
I'm actually more than happy to delineate between, I mean, legitimate Black Lives Matter supporters. I mean, I'd say like D-Ray and Sean King were definitely the more legitimate side of Black Lives Matter, and I suspect that's why they have the much larger followings than the sort of more fringe versions that say that white people are the problem.
Right, and I mean, can't leave out the actual founders, Patrice Cullors. I can't remember all their names at the top of my head.
But I wanted to come to these because I think these are the people that I'm really interested in talking about, because it's actually very reflective of the alt-right, or the alt-right's been very reflective of Black Lives Matter in this way, where the alt-right kind of had their movement hijacked by more popular and mainstream voices who wanted to be a sort of dissident version of the conservatives, whereas the alt-right really at their very core are white supremacist ethno-nationalists. And that's something that these people, I mean, Richard Spencer was the person who coined the term alt-right, and he's very much, I mean, I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I know Richard. He's from Boston. Can't get him on the show. Hey, Richard, if you're watching, come on the show sometime, Richard. Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to see that, actually. But yeah, so they're very annoyed that the sort of more mainstream credible voices have kind of hijacked their movement. And they've been specifically attacking these people to try and drive them out. And this is the same sort of issue I have with Black Lives Matter, because, I mean, if these people took their inspiration from Assata Shakur, then I think you can plausibly say that these are the sort of ethno-nationalists of Black Lives Matter. What do you think?
No, I don't think that's a reasonable assertion, right? So let's take Assata Shakur, for example, right? In the height of her personal narrative, she was born and bred in the middle of the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, right? And so her assertion of Black power, right? Actually, let me do it this way. Do you see a difference between someone shouting Black power and someone shouting white power?
That's a very interesting question. there is definitely a contextual difference.
Right. I mean, okay, we can go with that. So with Black Power, particularly with Assata Shakur, let's just call her a Black nationalist, ethno-nationalist, and everything you said. She's shouting Black Power at the time that the Black community was the most disenfranchised and the least powerful. So there's clearly a difference between someone who's having to shout Black Power out of resistance just to assert their humanity versus someone who's shouting white power as a means of suppressing and subjugating a subgroup.
Why didn't Martin Luther King shout Black Power?
I'm quite, he said plenty of times, "I'm black and I'm proud." I mean, you catch the right video.
The same Black Power,
you get the right video of Dr. King, and I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. But I'm quite sure you're going to find that Dr. King was far more radical than most people like to imagine he is today.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though. That's not his message that people remember. That's not the one that resonated.
Well, I mean,
he wasn't up there shouting Black Power or anything like that. So
yeah,
why wasn't he doing that?
Let's again. I'm not going to say that he didn't shout Black Power. I just can't think of an instance right now off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a time that he did. So let's just assume for now, for the sake of discussion, that he didn't.
No, I can't make that assumption because the more and more people dig into Dr. King, like I have a thread on my timeline. Dr. King was far more radical. So I'm quite sure at some juncture he shouted Black Power, right? Without a doubt. I would rather assume that he did than to assume that he didn't, because a lot of people try to whitewash him in that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take the sort of the historical figure that everyone recognizes, who's out there shouting, "I think people should be judged by their deeds rather than the color of their skin."
Yeah, so that's problematic, though, right? That's problematic because the historical Dr. King that everyone remembers is as inaccurate as the historical Jesus that the Republicans tried to pander to.
Sure.
He's totally different.
The point is what resonates with people.
I can't help what resonates with you guys. We have to do what resonates with us, right? So there's really, the question is
Hannah, what do you mean by you guys?
Same thing you would mean by you guys. I can't be held accountable for what resonates with you.
No, I'm just trying to establish a base from which we can discuss the issue, because I think there's a significant difference between Assata Shakur shouting Black Power, we need to overthrow the white supremacy, and Martin Luther King saying we deserve equal rights. And I think that difference is really the important part that we need to talk about. Do you see what I mean?
I'm going to chew on that for a second, because in terms of what's palatable and acceptable by the mainstream, power concedes nothing without force, right? That's just something that's a matter of fact. Dr. King
hang on. Yeah, that's true, but force comes in many different guises.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Martin Luther King didn't have to overthrow the American government to get equal rights for Black people, did he?
Yeah, but you never know what he would have had to have done because they killed him. As soon as he started talking about the intersection of race and class, that's when he was assassinated. So really hard to tell what he would have done in the long run.
Don't you find that interesting, though? As soon as he starts bringing class into it, the rich people kill him. Until then, they're okay with him, advocating for civil rights.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, no, that's my intersection all day. Let's be clear. If we take a class analysis out of our conversations, then we're not completely talking about the whole picture.
Sorry, you broke up a bit there. I didn't catch that.
No, I was saying if we take a class analysis out of the equation, then we're not looking at the whole picture of any issue, from racism to sexism. There's a class component to all of it.
I know, I totally agree. And one thing that I find a lot of, I suppose you would call them white Americans, don't understand is class. Many of them simply, they still believe that America is a classless society. And every time I see something from America, I'm just like, you're not a classless society.
No,
I don't even think a classless society can even exist.
No, I don't think so either.
In being British, we're very, very attuned to this sort of thing. And we're very... There's an easy way to make sure that class doesn't affect your life, and that is to be completely disrespectful to your superiors. That's it.
Say that again for me. That one went. I missed that one. Give that last part to me again.
Just do not show them any respect.
Yeah.
Which is how the British do it. There's one thing as a British person that I always find amazing when I watch Americans is that you guys seem to respect your politicians.
Yeah.
I'm constantly in awe of this ability to self-delude. because in Britain we have no respect for any politician.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way it should be. Like, not only do we respect politicians here, but we become sycophants of those politicians, and we change our arguments based on whether or not it's something our politician supports, and that's tremendously problematic.
Yeah, and I agree. I totally agree. And that's one of, I mean, I don't know whether you follow British politics, but that's something that I see Jeremy Corbyn supporters on the left doing all the time. They're very sycophantic towards Corbyn. It's like, look, he's just another politician.
I think it's fair to say that both sides, I don't know enough about your politics there, but I mean, there's sycophants on both sides of the equation.
There absolutely are. There absolutely are. But the problem is the people who aren't in power tend to be louder and agitate more, and so they get more attention. The sycophants for those people who are in power, they don't need attention, and so they don't really get it. Anyway, so yeah.
Okay.
So the difference, I mean, do you not think that Assata Shakur could be termed as someone who hated white people?
I mean, I don't know her, right? I just know her writings. Some of her writings.
I only know her writings as well.
So I can't say if she hates white people or not. I can say that the statement that you put in the video that everyone was chanting is so innocuous that that you portrayed it as something that was so nefarious, but that statement was about as bland as, it's kind of milquetoast.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to get the statement up.
Yeah, I'll pull it up for you. I think I have it around here somewhere. Where did I put it? It's our duty to fight. It's our duty to win. We must love each other and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. I mean, that could almost be a biblical scripture. Like, it's so innocuous in that regard.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It sounds like a cult chant to me.
I mean,
that could be a biblical scripture. Yeah, it could.
The Pledge of Allegiance sounds like a cult chant. I mean, if you get the right crowd saying it, the Star Spangled Banner is, anything can be a cult chant if you look at it through those lenses.
Nationalism is a form of cult behavior.
Yeah, okay.
It absolutely is. And that's the thing. I mean, don't you think it's a bit ironic for people in a free state to say that it's their duty to fight for their freedom?
Why would that be ironic when freedom is not really defined equally across the board?
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's whether the condition of the people under that definition of freedom actually meet the terms. And I agree that, like in the 70s, black people didn't. But do you think that it really makes sense in 2016 or 2017 now for college students, for middle-class college students to be chanting that in universities?
Yeah, so when they stand a 2.5% chance more likelihood of being killed by the police, yeah. When African Americans use marijuana, thankfully we're getting out of this era in America. But when we use marijuana at about the same rate as any other as white people, but we're 2 times as more likely to actually get arrested and charged for it, then yeah, there's still problems here. And here's the thing, right?
Again, this is another one of those generalizations, isn't it? Because I really don't think that a black person in like Hollywood has the same chance as a black person in Chicago, for example.
I mean, if you throw the class dynamic in it, sure, it doesn't break apart completely, but it is moderated, right?
But that's my point, isn't it? Like you said, if you leave out the class dynamic, then you have an incomplete analysis, and it's easy to default back to the racial analysis. But
we're still talking about the vast majority of African Americans. I mean, 50% of African Americans make less than $35,000 a year, so it's far more likely that you are poor as an African American than you are rich as an African American. So these statistics, even with the class analysis, it's even more salient because more than likely, if you're black, you're born into poverty.
That's true, but whose fault is that?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Whose fault do you think it is?
I think it's the fault of the black people who don't get married.
The black people who don't get married. Okay, explain more. Give me a little bit more on that.
Though. I should have got it in advance so I could give you the source, but I'll find it afterwards for you. But basically, I read Thomas Sowell's Wealth, Power and Politics, or Wealth, Poverty and Politics.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the title exactly. Mm-hmm. But basically, he points out that black families in America who are married, black couples in America who are married and have children, they have an average of $66,000 as a household income, which I don't think is under the poverty line at all. I think that's actually quite respectable. Whereas if you look at the income, the household incomes of single black parents, they're like $22,000-24,000 a year. So it's obvious that marriage is a beneficial status for a working class family.
So then we should totally just start arranging marriages to make sure that everybody gets married.
That's but this is the thing, because like 70% of black people in America aren't married, and so it's like, okay, so whose fault is that? Is it the white person's fault, or is it? I mean, whose fault is it that these people aren't?
I don't know.
Married?
I mean, are you married? Or
I am married. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got lucky. I got married. So it happens. I mean, people get married. But, I'm sure if we take a analysis of like Tinder or something like that, we'll find that there are a lot of single people out in the world. I mean, to ask why they don't get married is kind of fatuous, don't you think?
Well, no, I actually think this is where we need to start going with this, because, like you say, we can't just force people to get married. That's ridiculous, it's
right?
Obviously ridiculous. But it does seem to be an aspect. I mean, there is a reason that there is a stereotype that black people don't have fathers, because fatherlessness is such an endemic problem in black communities.
So that's not exactly true, right? So there's a recent research by that was forwarded by a book called All In by Josh Levs that shows that black people, even though they're not married to their baby mama, for lack of a better phrase at the top of my tongue, they are just as active, or actually more active in the lives of their children than any other demographic, white, Hispanic, or whatever. So because they are single, yes, they are single, but does that mean that they're fatherless? No, absolutely not.
Well, I think that it probably means a large percentage of them are, and I think that you can't suggest that. I mean, this is going to be equal as people who are married with fathers in the household, and I think that's the main thing. The fathers living with their children. Where, I mean, 72%. I've just got a thing up. I'll send you. 72% of black mothers are unwed. Now, obviously, a percentage of those are going to have a significant other living in the house, but is it going to to be the child's biological father? Possibly not.
I mean, but even still, even if it's not the biological father, I mean, the data still shows that there is a father figure, whether they live in the home or not, right? So the question is there a dynamic difference between them living in the home and not living in the home? I'm sure there's research that confirms that, but they're not fatherless. And this idea of black fatherlessness is built on the fact that they are not married, that women are single, and 72%. Let's take your data, for example. But that's just a piece of data. It doesn't really argue an argument, right? The data that corresponds with that says that even though they're not in the house, they're still participatory in their children's lives. So, I mean, we have to really dig deeper in the data.
I don't think that's a good substitute for having a father in the house.
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who would rather. I mean, so then what do we do? Do we force people to get married? I mean,
this is the thing, right? This is the point that we come to, because I think that we can agree that it's definitely beneficial and it's not just for black men, obviously.
Right.
This is I think, honestly, this is just a young male problem, as in young men need their fathers around.
Yeah, I agree to that.
Definitely. Yeah. And I know this personally, because my dad was in the Royal Air Force, and he spent 6 months out in Iraq during the invasion of Iraq, and another 6 months out in the Falkland Islands, which was it's a long way from Britain. And I was I think 12 and 14 when this happened, and looking back now, I could see myself going off the rails just with only having my mother around.
Absolutely. Now, are you talking about Iraq 1 or Iraq 2? I'm trying to gauge how old you are.
37.
37. Oh no, we're the same. We're the same age group. Okay, so you mean Iraq 1 then? The first Gulf War. Yeah. But I will say this to confirm what you're saying. Obviously, like the presence of a father in a home changes, or a father figure, or someone who could hold it.
It doesn't necessarily be their father.
Yeah,
a father figure.
Yeah, that does.
Child.
But I mean, we can't rip away the class analysis here out of convenience, right? So the class analysis in the United States is just across the board. If you are born in poverty, you have like a 3% chance likelihood to get out of poverty to the upper middle class. I mean, there is a tremendous problem of upward mobility in the United States that becomes a feedback loop. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Absolutely. So, I mean, if we're going to analyze the problems of poverty, we can't just take the class element out of it.
And I'm not trying to, and I agree. I totally agree with you on the issue of poverty. But let's. I think it's really important to get to this point where we can say, look, I do think the degradation of the black family is doing a disservice to black kids. I mean, if you look at I did a video a while ago, literally, why do black people commit more crime, which really upset the white nationalists, because I didn't just say it was because they were black. I actually said there might actually be real problems that are causing this. Part of that video, one of the statistics I was looking at was, if you look at a timeline of criminality in the black community compared to single parenthood, then you can see, like, at the beginning of the 80s, single parenthood, the middle of the 70s, single parenthood starts to really rise. It starts going up. And then about 14 years later, youth crime also goes up. And so it's obvious that these kids who have been raised in single parent households have become delinquents.
Yeah. So, I mean, you gave the exact timeline that I was actually getting ready to address, right? So there have been policies, and we're finding out even more so now that there are policies that have directly targeted the black community for the purposes of destroying the black community. Richard Nixon, we just got his notes that were released 22 years after an interview. One of his aides let us know that the war on drugs out of Richard Nixon's mouth was targeting the black community. And so not only did they flood the community with drugs, but then they arrested them for becoming addicted to drugs. They arrested them for selling the drugs. And so if there's ever a cause, right, if we're looking for a cause, a trigger point, it's consistent with the timeline that you just gave, that there has been a war waged on the black community from the White House. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of factors involved in crime. I mean, we could just be class reductionists, but that's involved too.
I think that's a really interesting point. Okay, so what should the black community do in response to that?
Well, we had to figure out what the hell was going on first, right? There's a lot of swift boating that took place between then and now, and we're just now getting a holistic picture. So what can we do to fix the problems of 40 years ago? There's nothing we can do. All we could do is realize what happened and then try to address it systemically versus haphazardly based on anecdotal information.
Well, actually, I actually think that an individual approach could really solve the problem. Because, I mean, systemically, it's really just a collection of individual actions. And I think that, I actually think the black community could really benefit from Stoicism, which is an ancient Greek philosophy that basically the individual is responsible to everything that happens to them.
Yeah.
And
so
obviously that's not necessarily true in every case, but there's an underlying philosophy behind it that's effectively, you do what is within your power. And it's absolutely within the power of the black community to form cohesive, solid family units, raise children who aren't delinquents and integrate into the system, get jobs, get themselves out of poverty.
Yeah, so we're going underneath this assumption. We're going underneath this assumption that there is an epidemic in the black community that is not reflective of the broader trend in the United States. I mean, just even religious people in the United States are overwhelmingly divorced. Like that's just the singleness is like a state of America. Yeah,
it is certainly worse in the black communities.
Right, but you're asking of the black community for us to ascend above something that is systematic. I mean, it's across the United States, right? But you're saying that for the issues of the black community, you know, for us to rise above, we have to rise above the collectiveness of the United States. And I mean, you could argue that, but that's not something that I feel is even beneficial to the conversation, mainly because it completely puts the onus on the responsibility on the individual without ever looking at the systemic forces around it. I mean, you know, we obviously can do both and, right?
Well, the reason I say that is because the systemic forces are actually not as powerful as you think. That's
well, you know, when you only stand a 3% chance of getting out of poverty, right? Even if, you know, that's married people and single people, that's really a systemic force that no one has when you're born into poor schools, right? You're born into
I don't agree that it is married people. On average, married black couples have an income of 68,000 or 66,000.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't consider that an impoverished household income.
Right. So no, but still, the fact still remains, right? It's a statistical fact that you really stand a very little chance of getting out of this poverty. Which is it though? Here's the thing. So we're looking at the married black couples, right, and saying, oh, they're doing well, but at the same time, you're arguing that the black people aren't doing well. So if we're going to look at the people who aren't doing well, you have to look at where they're starting from, and the majority of them are starting in abject poverty. I mean, less than 20,000 a year.
They are, and I think that they're in abject poverty because they come from single-parent households.
And in your conversation about the chicken or the egg, you said that the chicken, the single parents came first in this entire equation. Not the fact that the black community was completely flooded by drugs for an entire generation, and the fathers and the fathers were systematically taken out of the homes, because of the war on drugs.
Taken out of the homes? How are they taken out of the homes?
They've been imprisoned, like overwhelmingly.
Yeah, but why were they imprisoned?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to ask the question: why was there a war on drugs that targeted the black community expressly?
I'm not trying to absolve the U.S. government, but what I'm saying is, these people only have the power that you give them. Really, I mean, if the black community were to act like the Hindu community in Britain, then they would simply. I mean, you wouldn't really have the opportunity. Yeah, because these people would live well through right action.
Yeah, well, so if the Hindu community is ever strategically targeted, let's go back further past because I want to show you this. It's actually a trend, right? You go back further to the 1920s, early 20th century. You see thriving African American communities where there's a lot of wealth that's being generated and amassed, and families are, banks are open, schools are built, all black. And what happens to those communities? Well, Rosewood, Florida, completely destroyed by white nationalists. Black Wall Street, Tulsa, massacred. I mean, massacred, literally, where they took planes and shot people and dropped bombs from the air. I mean, anytime there has been a movement towards black independence and black solidarity, all these things that people say, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, we see that it's targeted not just by vigilantes, but by the government. So there has been systematic problems throughout the existence.
How long ago was that?
There's people who are still alive today who were there. So I'm not sure how that question.
Like 50, 60 years, something like that?
No, I mean, we're getting close. Well, not alive during Black Wall Street, but yeah.
Right, because I think, honestly, I do think that the situation has probably changed by now. And I think that calling back something that happened a long time ago is, I mean, it's important to know, but I think it's important to not let that hang over your head.
Well, it's not a matter of hanging over your head. It's just a matter of what resources did a generation start with, right? And we look at a generation, this is the ironic thing. A lot of white people think black people just came into existence in 64, 65 with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and think nothing about the systemic forces that existed before that, right? So we like to have a cutoff date and say, oh, that's no longer relevant. Well, when your trajectory in life is based on how much wealth your parents have, it's completely relevant to and you know this from a class analysis. So why would we deprive the black community of a class analysis just simply because the roots of that class, of where they started in the class structure, was targeted, they're plundered. Our communities were ravaged economically. It wasn't just we don't like you because you're black. They stole our capital for generations. And now you have a generation that's born with zero capital, born in abject poverty, and we wonder why their children are in poverty. I mean, that's highly disingenuous.
Well, no, that's the thing. We actually don't. We know exactly why their children are in poverty. And the problem is that, unfortunately, the only people who can get them out of poverty are themselves. And I know this because of my own personal family history.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not really apples to apples there, right? So can they get themselves out of poverty? Yeah, you have to be like the phenomenally in that 3%, right? 3% of them can get themselves out by their own. On that of the 3% of them can, and not just black Americans, right? White Americans as well. 3% of Americans can get out of abject poverty and move into the upper middle class. That's the elite of the elite, the most talented, the most talented.
You don't even need to get to the upper middle class. You can just aim for the lower middle class. I mean, that's $66,000 a year is probably lower middle class, but that's still not poverty. And the reason I say this is because, look, you can't rely on the state to help you out of poverty.
Yeah, but we can rely on the state, but we should, and this is what Black Lives Matter is saying, we rely on the state not to target us and not to systematically abuse us. It's for whatever reason, like whether they're racist or not is completely irrelevant. It's their laws, it's their actions and their deeds that have it's like we want to say, if we look at white America, right, a lot of the wealth in white America sustains. It's there. You could trace it back hundreds of years. Most black families can't trace wealth back through a generation.
I think that the class analysis might be useful here because I think saying white America is a bit of a broad stroke. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of trailer parks where there isn't much wealth transference going on.
Sure.
So,
and this is the
like,
irony of it, right? So this is the saddest irony of it all, right? Now, one of the ways I disagree with Black Lives Matter is that they don't introduce a robust enough class analysis. I've gone to blows with them over that, right? But it's amazing to me that the things that we address in the Black community actually would benefit every single community, from the police reform, from criminal justice reform, to the economic issues that I bring up on a regular basis. But it's rejected because we have a focus on the Black community. But here you're saying, oh, if you guys focused on yourself, well, we are focusing on ourselves. And because we focus on ourselves, you call us akin to the Klan.
Cross wires there, right? So calling your movement Black Lives Matter automatically ring fences out poor white people who might also have class issues. So that in itself is kind of a disservice to what you're trying to achieve. And honestly, I'm actually completely on board with what you're saying here. I actually think you're a fantastic representative of Black Lives Matter. And so that's a problem in itself. And then you say white America, which you've racialized this. This is now no longer a class analysis; it's a racial analysis.
But there is a there's a clear racial component to the class analysis, right? So just one piece of data real quick is that it would take a Black family on the same trajectory that we are right now. It would take us over 200 years to amass the same amount of wealth that white families have, right? On average, these are averages, right? So clearly there is a racial component to the class analysis as well.
Yeah, but that's not true. I mean, like I said, a married Black family has an income of almost $70,000. The average white family that's married has an income of $77,000.
No, we're talking about wealth, not annual income. We're talking about wealth, not overall wealth, not annual income.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, fine. But the point is, I mean, most white people don't have significant stores of wealth. Most white people are actually in debt. So it's again, just saying, like, white America, you actually mean rich America. That's the point. You don't actually mean white people.
But when there's when 50% of the Black community makes less than $35,000, households makes less than 35 and has wealth of less than $1,000, then there is a racial component to the class analysis as well. Like we can't be class reductionists and think that there's absolutely no racial component to it. When wealth is determined by how much wealth your parents have, well, then if we start down that slippery slope of what did the previous generation have, we have to confront the issues of wealth that was literally robbed from the Black community by white nationalist organizations and the federal government.
I actually think it's a red herring.
How so?
I actually think it's a complete red herring. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get that back. Being brutally honest about this.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, no, but I think if we're talking about and we're making almost a moral judgment on the Black community for the failing of the Black family, which is kind of softly.
I'm not making a moral judgment. I'm not making a moral judgment.
Well, maybe not you, right? The evangelicals.
Let me explain. Right? Let me explain. Because
give me more.
I don't want you to feel defensive, but I know I'm shifting the onus onto Black people, saying, look, I completely accept that everything you've said that has happened. Okay, I completely accept that Nixon did target Black communities with drugs. And I don't know why, and I'm not a supporter of his or anything like that. I don't know why. I don't know anything about it. So I'm just going to completely accept what you're saying at face value. But now that we're in the position that we're in, what can happen? And what can happen is that Black people can actually take the power back into their own hands and say, look, I can make a change here, and I'm going to. And much like you and your parents and things like that. And one of those things, getting married and forming a stable, long-lasting household is definitely a huge step up. Yeah. And this is what you're saying, that half of Black families exist on less than $35,000 a year. Well, that's because they're single parents. That could be instantly rectified by marriage.
So part of the issue here is we are discussing what the Black community can do, focus on themselves, develop, focus on the issues in the Black community. And here at the same time, you're saying Black Lives Matter, who does these things, right? They do more than just criminal justice reform. They do more than just protest against police. They protest against violence in the Black community, but no one ever gives them credit for those things. They focus on the Black family unit, even if it's not a traditional family unit. They focus on the right of LGBTQ African Americans to be able to adopt. They focus on all these things to create household units, but yet we're compared to the Klan. I mean, which way are we going to have it?
I definitely think Assata Shakur's ideology is definitely comparable.
Yeah, but I mean, but if the focus of Black Lives Matter today is on everything that you've described, even if it's not in the traditional format, then how can you simultaneously say that we need to focus on the Black community? Well, we are focusing on the Black community, but by focusing on the Black community, you call us a racist organization and ideology.
Well, no. There is absolutely a racist ideology underpinning. I mean, like you said, the founders lionized Assata Shakur, and she is not the sort of person, in my opinion, should be lionized.
Well, I mean,
she's obviously a damaged individual who hates white.
I mean, I think most people who were born in Jim Crow might have some damage, right? They might have some problems, and I'm not saying that she does, but I think it's reasonable to assume that a person whose story arc climaxed during the height of the civil rights movement, to call them to compare them to today's white nationalists, that's highly disingenuous. Like, it's like you're putting a wibbly wobbly timey wimey kind of time and space kind of thing going on there, where you're applying Assata Shakur's life in the 60s to Klan's people today.
Yeah, but the Klan today is like 3,000 people. So it's a tiny, irrelevant organization, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's so many other smaller organizations that just amass into a movement. Now, whether and it's not just the Klan, right? But it's also people who tacitly sit by, and they might have the most wonderful rhetoric on race. Let's take the Democratic Party. They have wonderful rhetoric on race, but have done nothing to actually push back against some of the same systemic forces. That's why you don't see Black Lives Matter aligning with any political party. They're simply just saying these are the things that we need to address, and as we address them, focusing on the Black community, we get called racist. But you're saying we need to be focusing on the Black community.
Well, no, this is my point, right? You can't rely on people outside of you, but on the flip side of that, you can't point the finger at people outside of your group either.
Why?
I mean, saying, oh well, the Klan did this 100 years ago, or this happened 50 years ago. These things are all excuses. These are all excuses for what's going on. I mean,
Dylan Roof just killed 9 people.
Black people from getting married, aren't they?
He killed 9 people just last summer.
Sure.
Pretty
he killed
recent.
9 people. It's a terrible tragedy.
Yeah. So now there's one more
changing the culture of Chicago.
To be sure, there's one more. There's 2 or 3 more Black families that are fatherless now because of people like Dylan Roof and the ideology that created him. Right. So
I'm totally opposed to it.
We're not speaking of things that are just historical, but if we're going to talk about wealth, right? We're going to talk about the economic conditions of the Black community. You can't talk about wealth unless you talk about it generationally. And you can't talk about it generationally unless you look at the systematic plunder of the Black community economically over generations, right?
Okay,
so that's where I bring in the historical perspective.
When you tell me this, I hear someone who's trying to disempower Black people.
I guess, if you say so. How so?
Because you're pointing the finger. You're saying, look, everyone else did this to you. Don't worry about doing anything for yourself. Worry about what they did to you.
I mean, that's quite the straw man there, right? Because you presented an argument about Black wealth today, but you remove the class analysis from that argument. And the class analysis says that you have to look at it generationally. So it's not disempowering Black people to say, listen, the economic condition that you're in right now does have historical roots that go back generations, all the way back to slavery, right? There's still effects that can be felt today. Does that mean that you give an excuse to someone and say, okay, so now just do nothing about your life, just look over here and blame everybody? I don't think any organization has ever told their people to completely forget about changing your life today.
They don't have to do that, right? It's part of the culture. There's a YouTuber called That Guy T, and he's a Black chap, and he recently did a video basically he addressing the culture of many Black communities, and in many of them there is undoubtedly, and he said this. He said he grew up, he never knew any white growing up because he just wasn't around them. But he was constantly indoctrinated by friends and family, just the community he lived in, to worry about white people, saying, "Oh, white people want to keep you down," and all that sort of thing. And it's this kind of otherization of white people that is, I think, a real problem. And I mean, I don't think it's productive at all. And every time you do this, you are effectively making excuses for yourself.
Why do we tell people never to forget 9/11? Why do we tell people to never forget the Holocaust?
I think we should forget 9/11.
Why do we tell people never to forget X, Y, and Z? Right? Let's never forget this.
Well, I think the Jews should forget the Holocaust. I think they should move past all of this. I don't think having these things hanging over you is a healthy mental aspect. I mean, the Germans at the moment are so indoctrinated into the guilt. There's a cult of guilt in Germany that is really doing damage to Germany, and it's just in the minds of regular Germans. I mean, I lived in Germany for 8 years, and every time you go out drinking, you'd end up, and as a British person as well, I'd end up talking to like some German guy in a bar or something, and all of a sudden we'd be talking about the Nazis and the Holocaust, and I'm thinking, dude, you're 20 years old. You know, you've never seen a Nazi.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to throw a card out here that may not be fair to you, but that's a mighty comfortable position to never really have to look back and say, okay, this happened in my timeline and this changed the trajectory of my timeline. You know, that's I hate to use this word, but that is a form of privilege in itself, right? To be able to say my timeline, I don't have anything, a high watermark in my family history that I have to actually look back and observe and study and understand.
Well, you'd be surprised, actually. My dad isn't white.
Mm-hmm.
So my granddad wasn't white, and he was a black man in the 60s who married my white grandmother. And my father is his son, his older son, and then I'm my father's older son.
Okay, so then
I might look quite white, but if you would see a sort of a genealogy of my family, it's not. And yeah. I got to hear about how in the 60s and the 70s, my dad had to go and break some kid's arm with a baseball bat because he was racially abusing his younger brother, mm-hmm. and things like this. It's not. My family is aware, you know, I am aware of what it's like.
So then you have that story, right?
So it was for my nan.
But you have that story. You have that story. You have that narrative as a part of your family, as part of your legacy. Why should someone come around and tell you to forget that because it's not important?
Well, no, it's not important. That's the thing. I don't sit there and go, well, something happened. I mean, and my family was incredibly poor. My dad and his 6 brothers lived in a caravan for about 4 years of their life before they were, you know, given a council house by the state. They unbelievably poor, and yet now my father owns his own house, nice 4-bedroom house. He owns it outright. He's had a nice, comfortable career in the military. He's done very well for himself, and it's all because he made the right decisions and just worked for what he has. He didn't expect handouts, and he didn't sit there going, it's someone else's fault that I'm poor.
Right. So and again, right, we're using anecdotal information to create a generalized trend when in reality, the black community doing exactly what you said that they should be doing, which, you know, whether you said it or not, you know, they would be doing it anyway. But by doing this, we're also guilty of being too focused on the black community. I mean,
no, I don't think you are. I don't think you can be too guilty of being focused on your own community.
Well, I mean, but that's the whole complaint, right? That's the whole complaint against Black Lives Matter. As you say, we do a disservice to ourselves by not including other races or racializing it. We're saying
there's a difference between Black Lives Matter and black communities. Like we've already established, most of the people rioting in Milwaukee were not Black Lives Matter supporters. You know, these people are not part of your movement. And there are also loads and loads and loads of poor white people who suffer from beatings and shootings and whatnot at the hands of the police that can't support Black Lives Matter because they're white, or at least they feel that they can't.
Well, I mean,
it doesn't.
I mean, that's and that's the saddest part about the story, right? The saddest part about this entire conversation is that as many white people who are killed by the police who are unarmed, the fact that they feel like they can't join with Black Lives Matter, who are fighting for the same exact cause, that's just tragic, right? But what I've seen more than anything else are people who are not genuinely concerned about those people, those white people who were killed. That, you know, the 6-year-old child in Louisiana who was killed. They don't really care about them until it's time that they can use them as a prop, saying, oh, all these white people are being killed by police, and you don't see us out there saying white lives matter. Well, you should be out there protesting when the police are killing children and killing unarmed teenagers, like 2 teenage girls in 2014 killed by police officers, unarmed. I mean, the white people should be out there protesting more than black people, but because we've taken it upon ourselves to say we're tired of the police killing us, now we're the bad people. That doesn't compute.
I think the difference, and again, I don't think that you're bad people or anything like that. I think the difference is that there isn't really a white identity as such. Or at least, they're not in popular parlance.
There is. There really is, though. There really, and the best example of it is 2008 with Bill O'Reilly and the presidential nominee then, John McCain, who was a presidential nominee on Fox News, right? Millions of people watch this. He said that America is run by white Christian men, right? So America culture is white culture. And he lamented the fact that America, just a clip on YouTube, you could get it, lamented the fact that America is becoming browner, right? So it shows you that America default position is white Christian men, and there's components of that have to be fought back against just to bring us in parity. And what people feel too often is that equality feels like oppression when you've always been at the top of the pack. That can't be the case.
I really hate that phrase, because one thing I always see that, and I encountered that phrase with feminists who were actively trying to restrict other people's freedom of speech, and they were saying, well, equality just feels like oppression when you've been at the top. It's like, well, what you're trying to get your speech at the expense of someone else's. That is a form of oppression.
Well, it's two different things, right? So yeah, you have the people who demand a safe space, and then they want to have a space to say whatever they want to say without anybody pushing back. I mean, that's the number two place where I conflict with Black Lives Matter generally, right? I don't believe in safe space. If you come into the public square and you have something to say, someone else, no matter how vitriolic you think it is, they should have the right to say it back. But we're actually talking about two different things here.
Well, no, I'm just saying that I don't like that phrase, because it's an easy way of dismissing someone else's concerns without even looking at whether they're legitimate or not. Yeah,
if they're and I hate to slam people, but they're overly simplistic and they're looking for an easy way out, that's what you do with that. But in this case, we're talking about very clear examples of people who are in power and try to use their control of power right then to keep other groups from coming into parity. That is oppression. That is a systemic problem that has to be addressed. And that's exactly what the presumptive nominee of a major party in the United States had a conversation with a top propagandist in the United States. Like, these are not fringe examples. These are mainstream people who are lamenting the demise of white Christian men as the main power structure in America.
Yeah, but I mean, do you really see that as a white identity, though? I mean, what else goes along with a white identity?
I mean,
do you think the average white person thinks of themselves as being white before they think of themselves as being American, for example?
I honestly, I can't read their minds, so I don't know what they're thinking.
I'm not asking you to read much, but just from your interactions with them, is that the impression you get? I mean,
I would say that there's a default. There's a default setting, right? There's a default setting in America without question, and that default setting is controlled. Like, I can't even say controlled. It's just there. Right? You don't even have to try to do it anymore. It's like it was a video, and this is clearly an anecdote, but it's a great example. It's a video of the four broadcasters who are on television, two of them black, two of them white, and the two white people are talking about the definitions of beauty. And the examples that they kept bringing up were white women who were certain weight, certain height, certain hairstyle, and these were examples of beauty. And the black journalists are sitting there like, what? It's because there's a default setting of expectations of culture in the United States that no one has to gather together and say, this is our white identity. Like, America is born out of white identity.
Yeah, but that's my point, though. I don't think white people necessarily see it as white identity. I think they see it as American identity, and they think of that as American identity because they are the majority group. I mean, it has to be that the culture is controlled by the majority group, right?
Doesn't have to be, no. Why?
Well, isn't that aristocracy if it's not?
I mean, why would it have to be controlled by the majority group?
Because they're the majority. I mean, what sense does it make to have the society controlled by a minority from within society?
Well, I mean, why does it have to be a sense of control? Why couldn't it be a sense of consensus versus control?
Well, sure, but the consensus is always going to be the majority consensus.
Well, not necessarily, right? You have to protect the minority from the rule of the tyranny of the majority, right? And vice
absolutely.
versa.
I mean, we're talking culture. I didn't think we were talking rights. But like culturally, if you're going to be like, well, the cultural norm in this society is like, if I went to China, it'd be a Chinese woman. And, I wouldn't expect it to be
right.
Like
but I see what you're saying there. But here's a problem with that, right? When you have so much of America that has been built on the backs of African Americans, right? We could clearly track throughout every stage of American history where black people were there building America, and then that culture in itself has been intentionally suppressed for hundreds of years. Just let's take 64 as a turning point. 64, 65 as a turning point, right? You have cultural baggage that has to be addressed. If it's not addressed, then that dominant culture that has been there all along is content in simply thinking this is just the way it is, this is the way it should be. All along, you have been built on the backs of an entirely different culture. So I think the onus is on everyone to form a consensus that is inclusive. I don't think there's anything wrong with inclusivity.
Well, yeah, but what if they don't? What if they don't do that?
Well, then we just let people know, hey, we're here. We're here, and our culture has been here, and this is our home just as much as anyone else. I love it when people say go back to Africa. Actually, my
Yeah,
family's bones, my family's bones go back 6 generations here, as far as I can count. That's as far as I can trace.
Yeah.
Then it hits slavery. We built this country just like anybody else. We built that, so this is our home, and we have the right to be comfortable and stretch our legs, and
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
all that's what we're saying.
No, I totally agree. And so, okay, so what would you like to see moving forward? Like, what would you? Because I mean, one thing that I just can't get past is it's the breakdown of social cohesion in the sort of thug communities that we were talking about, right? This is such an obvious problem, and it really seems. I mean, I watch like the media they produce, and just and I read what they say on Twitter and stuff like that, and there seems to be a respect and sort of adulation towards this kind of gang culture.
Well, if you go looking for it, Sargon, if you go looking for it, you could find anything, right? Have you hung out like some of the?
I'm not saying it's all of it or anything.
Some
like
of the
that,
rowdiest people I know are white boys. Like there's some white boys I don't even want to party with because they're just crazy as hell, right? So you can find thug culture anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're talking specifically about black communities who engage in this kind of culture.
But why? Why would that be the impetus of the driving force behind the conversation when it's present in every community?
So many of the problems for the black community comes out of this culture.
No, not necessarily, right? So even when you have people who never lived a day in their life in the hood, getting the same type of treatment that they would have gotten if they did live in the hood, it transcends the poverty trap of the hood. It transcends.
Yeah, but the reason these sort of ghettos exist is because of this culture. I mean, there's nothing to prevent black people from actually getting married, getting jobs, getting some wealth behind them, buying a house.
So there you go with these moral. You default back to these moral judgments that.
No, this is not a moral judgment. This is actually a pragmatic argument.
Actually, no, it's quite laden with the moral judgment, right? And I'm noticing how you seamlessly go back and forth between using a class analysis and not using a class analysis, because everything that you just said has an equal explanation in terms of a class analysis. So
I'm not disregarding the class analysis. I'm actually. Okay, we've got the class analysis. I agree with you on the class analysis. So I'm just looking at it from someone whose family worked out of the working class and what they did to achieve that. And that's what the black community has to do.
So what of all the white families that are still... What about the white families in Appalachia, right? That's kind of the cliche example.
Yeah.
What about the white families that are born into poverty, stay in poverty, they may or may not get married? What of all of them?
What about them? What
I mean,
do they make to the black community?
should they? Is the only reason that they're in poverty is because they didn't get married?
No, I think there's some severe cultural issues with them as well, to be honest.
Okay, so we're finding we can find these cases, we can find these examples of people who are in poverty. If I was talking to
someone from Appalachia who didn't understand why they were so poor and backwards, I would give them some advice too. But we are talking about the black community because that's what Black Lives Matter is worried about, right?
Right, and as we worry and focus on all of these issues, that's the recurring theme. And unfortunately, I mean, I would love to keep talking with you, but I think my time might be running down a little low here. Okay. But as they focus on these issues and they focus with a laser-like intensity on the black community, part of the calculation that is being used as a political spin and propaganda is that is a problem in and of itself. Right. So if Black Lives Matter is focusing on all these things that you're saying about the black community, what's the problem with Black Lives Matter then? Well,
the problem is for me, the problem is the underlying ideology that isn't being addressed. But if we're to ignore that and move on to like, okay, what kind of future do Black Lives Matter want to build for black people? Then the question is, okay, what can be done in black communities? Mm-hmm. And I really think the first thing that needs to be done is the total discrediting of this kind of gangster culture. It's a dead end.
I tell you what, if you spend the better part of your day discrediting all of the fringe elements in white culture or even in Gamergate culture.
I'm not talking about fringe elements though. I think there are a lot of people who indulge in this kind of community.
That's a big assertion. Like, there's a lot of people who, I can counter assert with Anecdote, right? There's a lot of people who grew up in the hood and they managed to come out of the hood without indulging into this in this culture. So without actual data, we're both just making speculations here.
Well, no, yeah, I know. I'm not closely defining my terms, but we can agree that these are things that occur. I'm not. This is the thing, right? At no point am I making a moral judgment about any of this. This is what I mean. It's strange that you're saying, "Oh, you're making a moral judgment." I'm not. I don't think any of these people are bad people because of their circumstances.
The moral judgment, the moral judgment that I see in it, is, and I'll be transparent here. I may be applying to you the same driving force of evangelical Christians, which I'm sure you're not.
No,
so I might be applying that to you, to be fair, in terms of a moral judgment. But when I see you take away the class analysis, like on a fly, take away the class analysis,
I'm actually trying to build on top of it.
Right. But you can't build on top of it without giving it the context of what wealth actually looks like in America. And wealth in America cannot always is connected to the previous generation, and you simply can't finish this conversation without giving credence to the things that actually targeted the Black community systemically for hundreds of years to extract wealth. So to take away that component of it and simply say the reason they have a problem is because they're not married, well then, I guess the answer is just to go through and make sure everybody gets married. But that's an American problem at this point. It might be a global problem, far as I know, but I know for sure it's an American problem.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right, and that's the thing, right? Maybe I should have been more considerate, because it didn't occur to me that you probably have had evangelicals wagging the finger at you.
Oh yeah, for generations. Their problem, their explanation to everything is Jesus and marriage, and then we find out their marriages are just a cover for some other things.
They are no yardstick by which to measure itself.
Well, this is Sargon. I appreciate it, but I am actually in a shared studio, and the folks who do a show right after me, they're getting ready to come on.
Sure, okay.
I enjoy the conversation, man.
Yeah, if you want to do it again, I'd be more than happy to carry this on anytime. Because I honestly wasn't trying to make any moral judgments, and I honestly do think that it's just a matter of perspective. And I know that I'm saying this from a position of privilege, not being in these communities, not having the same pressures on me. But it's also, I think it gives me a different perspective that might be useful. Because honestly, I don't hate Black people. I want to help. I can see a problem, and I can see that there is something that can go on. But it does seem there are a couple of mental stumbling blocks that need to be overcome, and they're tough. I appreciate that it's really tough, and I'm not trying to say that history doesn't count or anything like that. I'm honestly just thinking from a pragmatic perspective. But anyway, thanks very much.
No problem, man.
And like I said,
we'll pick it up. I disagree. Just for the record, I disagree with probably like 75% of what you just said, but that's why we have to pick up on another conversation.
Sure, man. We'll do it again another time.
All right. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everyone.